Prologue. August 4th, 1 year, 4 months, and 17 days after the awakening. For 2 days I've been trapped here in this 2-story office building. If you're reading this and happen upon my dead body, please see that my writings find their way back to the Hoover Dam, or anywhere else civilization has started to rebuild itself. It was probably a mistake running into this building. There's no way out except through the massive zombies waiting below, but it seemed the best way to save my life from the 1,000 or so that are surrounding it right now. This morning I awoke to see that despite the bright sun, they're still outside and on the first floor. The smell from these zombies is not nearly as bad as what I have encountered in the past. Most are dried out husks of their former living selves. The desert takes a much different toll on the walking dead here than the ones in Florida. The desert is barren. Even the landscaping that was transplanted here to make the area feel more livable is gone. All that remains is a wasteland full of death, just like the way most of the world is now. I must be the only living creature for 100 miles, and these zombies seem to know it. They're hungry, and it is doubtful they will leave anytime soon. They know I'm here, and they will not stop until they have the chance to feed. I found nothing in this small office except for a couple of useless computers and printers, a shitload of staples, and this paper. My supplies have dwindled down to half a canteen of water and a sleeve of saltine crackers. I only have 3 rounds left in my Glock, which I'm saving for either a scab or myself, depending on the situation. The thought of a scab coming to join this mixture of walking corpses turns my stomach, as if I don't have enough problems. I seem to have nothing but time while I wait for dehydration to set in. That's why I'm writing this. I want the world to know the truth about me. The truth about who the real heroes were. Believe me, I'm not one of them. But the ones that helped me, the ones that died trying to save my life, they are the heroes and deserve to be recognized and honored. I guess I'll start by telling you a little about myself. I'll try not to bore you too much with my past, but I think it's important you know who I am and where I come from. My name is Christian Shea Hunt. Something inside me makes me invulnerable to the death that covers the earth. I originally thought it could have been my diet, but I know better now. Mountain Dew and beer along with fast food and chips don't seem like the right cocktail to make someone immune from turning into a flesh-eating corpse. Besides, if that were true, half of America would have been safe. Just a few days ago, they were able to produce the first vaccine from my blood. Dr. Tripp said I was a hero and that the survivors of the pandemic owed their lives to me. Funny, I don't feel like a hero. That's probably because I'm not one. Sure, I may be the savior of humanity, but that's just because I'm lucky. I come from a military family. My father was a colonel in the Air Force, and my mother, Ruth, was a stay-at-home mom who raised my younger sister, Trinity, and me. All in all, I grew up in a pretty good home. When I was 15, we moved to the Sunshine State. My dad was stationed at Patrick Air Force Base, which was just south of Cape Canaveral. That was where they used to launch the space shuttle. We moved to a nice house in the city of Melbourne, which wasn't far away from the Air Force Base. Like always, it was hard starting off in a new area. Luckily, I met David Cavana just a few months after we planted roots. It didn't take long before David and I became best friends. Over the next few years, we were inseparable. Dave's parents were off and on in their relationship his whole life. This made him the dependent sort of guy that I could convince to do anything. When we graduated high school, I convinced him to join the Army with me. I only joined because when I told my father I wanted to take a break from school, he all but made me join the service. Thanks, Dad. Dave and I had different jobs in the Army. I was a supply clerk, and he was combat infantry. Both of us, however, were stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I only got deployed once to Afghanistan, whereas Dave went multiple times. Now, in the military, you're either a combat class like infantry or special forces, or a pogue, like supply or a cook. I was considered a pogue, and I was perfectly fine with that, except that it adversely affected me and Dave's relationship. Pogues didn't have too much in common with the grunts of the infantry. The few times I saw him at Bragg, he was with his comrades, and I was definitely the odd man out. My tour in Afghanistan was pretty boring. I never left the camp I was stationed in. In the beginning, I would get anxious and have dreams of grandeur. I had this idea that they might need my help outside the wire. Those thoughts quickly dissipated when I saw the first bodies come through the gate. Killed and wounded soldiers, blood, body parts. Those type of things tend to turn you off from combat. There were no glorious engagements or battles for me to write home about. My job was to sort through the gear of the wounded or deceased and ship it back to the families of the victims. If anything, I became depressed while I was there. I witnessed a couple of rocket attacks and a few locals firing off their AK-47s at our perimeter, but overall, I was only in real danger once. It was a horrid memory I'll never forget, even after the awakening. One day, a suicide bomber made it to the last checkpoint, into our camp, and detonated a bomb hidden in an old tattered car. I was only about 200 feet away when it happened. I won't lie. After I shook the concussion off, I hid. Only for a minute, but still, I was a coward. I could hear other people running to the gate, soldiers shouting for medics and screams of pain. Meanwhile, I was ducking behind a generator, shaking in my boots. Finally, I sucked in my gut and left my hiding spot. Once the smell hits you, you can instantly recognize burnt flesh. Something in your mind tells you that's burnt hair or skin or muscle, even though you've never smelled it before. There was too much going on to really pay attention, so my clumsy ass tripped. I spun around to see what had caused me to fall, only to look away and pretend I didn't see the horror I was witnessing. I had tripped over a bloody arm that was still connected to a partial torso of a fellow soldier. I couldn't make out the face because half the man's head was gone. I never found out who the partial body belonged to, and I never wanted to. The memory has burned into my mind. More than once, I would dream of that dreadful day. Dave and I reconnected near the end of our service. He was happy to be getting out, as was I. College seemed more appealing than when I had just graduated high school. Dave was different, though. He was no longer the weak, independent kid I grew up with. He was both mentally and physically stronger. The days of me manipulating him were over. I had even heard he was being put up for a Bronze Star for an engagement he had in Afghanistan. He never told me if he got it, though, nor did he talk about what happened in that battle. By the time we got out of the Army, my dad had retired to the northern panhandle of Florida. Dave's grandmother had passed away and left her house to his dad, who told us we could use it as long as we were in school. So Dave and I moved back to our hometown and settled into his late grandmother's house. It was in Palm Bay, Florida, a couple of miles south of where he and I grew up. Dave was taking anywhere from 3 to 5 classes a semester, while I was dropping classes like bad habits. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life, and as time went on, I seemed to be getting lazier and lazier. Like I said before, Dave had changed over the time he spent in the service. By the second year of college, he had a host of weapons and survival equipment. Now, I was no anti-gun fanatic or anything, but I thought this was a bit extreme. It was almost like he was expecting the war to follow us home. And no matter what, he always had his 9mm Glock with a round in the chamber, ready to go at his bedside. He didn't even bother putting it in the drawer of his nightstand unless he was leaving the house. Occasionally, he would holster it and walk around the house while he did chores or made lunch. Personally, he scared me sometimes. I would come home from the bar and catch him geared up full battle rattle in all his ridiculous survival gear, staring in the mirror and checking himself over. It freaked me out. Don't get me wrong, he was my best friend and a great guy. I guess he just had his own way of dealing with whatever he was going through. I'm not saying he had PTSD, which I would hear other people talk about like it was some disease all soldiers got after war. I mean, you can't go through some of that shit without changing how you view the world. It doesn't mean you're crazy or psychologically screwed. It just means you've been exposed to the horrors that many in our country had never seen. I never told any of our friends about the episodes Dave would go through. I mean, I didn't experience what Dave did, but I did understand. I guess if you've never served or faced some traumatic situation, you never would get it. But unfortunately, times were changing. Soon, those who would survive would get it, all too well.